Can't say the Washington Commanders are back in the news for all the wrong reasons if they never really left in the first place. But here we are with more details on financial improprieties, NFC East quarterback rankings you may have some feelings about, and Mock Draft Monday with Joe Marino of the Draft Network and the Locked On Bills podcast stepping up to get judged by us on the Locked On Commanders podcast.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome in, Commanders fans, to the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. We are your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, free and available on all platforms. And we thank you for making us your first listen or your first view of the day. I am David Harrison, covering the Commanders for Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation, and my co-host Chris Russell, the Rooster, one half of the Russell and Medhurst show on the Team 980. Find Chris and Pete there Monday through Friday from 3 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time or anytime, along with this show on the Audacy app. When we're not there or here, we're on Twitter at dharrison82, at WrestleMania621, and at LO Commanders. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Another day, another public debacle for Dan Snyder and the Washington Commanders. Chris, the House Oversight Committee, according to Front Office Sports and AJ Perez, who you are going to have on this very program tomorrow, have information that the Commanders kept ticket revenue that is part of revenue sharing with the 31 other clubs. Interestingly enough, Chris, a situation that we actually just talked about to wrap up last week turns out may actually be happening.
Yep. And, look, David, nothing should surprise us at this point, right? Nobody's saying that Dan Snyder is guilty, that the Commanders are guilty, but let's start here. This does not look good, and this might be, in the eyes of the NFL and in the eyes of NFL owners, meaning the 31 others, this might be the worst infraction, potentially, of them all. Worse than, yes, sexual harassment. Worse than anything else that has been said or done. Worse than anything we've heard, or a hand on a thigh, allegedly, or something like that. It's sad. It's sad to a bunch of multi-billionaires that potentially 40% of the revenue that the Commanders and Dan Snyder were supposed to be sharing might have been, let's call it, siphoned off somehow, or rerouted, or not given to the league. That is the rule. About 40% of the visiting or of the home ticket revenue goes. That doesn't include surcharges. That doesn't include taxes. That doesn't include club and luxury seats and suites. That doesn't include parking. That's just ticket revenue that gets sent to the NFL and then redistributed as part of the league-wide revenue sharing plan. And yet here we are, according to the report and according to AJ's sources, AJ Perez's sources, Front Office Sports, you mentioned we're going to have them on the next episode. Again, apparently we heard about the 2-book cooking system, and apparently they weren't doing this. And again, if this is true, the one thing I will point out, not only could this be the death blow for Dan Snyder, but think about this. Think about this, David. The Washington Commanders and the NFL immediately jumped in when the first reports came out last week about different books and all that stuff. This time, nobody had a word. Nobody said anything. No comment, no statement, no nothing when asked for a comment or statement. I don't know if that means anything, but it could mean something.
Yeah, I mean, behavior is obvious is very, very commonly a marker of what the truth is. At least one person gave information in recent weeks, 2 congressional investigators alleging that the Commanders didn't pass along the full 40%. Again, per the Front Office Sports sources, not clear how long it's been going on or who authorized it. The Commanders and the NFL apparently learned about the allegations in recent weeks. One source, again, told Front Office Sports. But what is clear, Chris, and this is kind of something that we've mentioned here before on the show too, at the end of the day, this is all going to land at the feet of Dan Snyder as the owner of the organization, right? But you talk about certain things, and there are certain things that require that basically Dan can do on his own. But there are parts of this, and I think this is part of the overarching story and problem that is maybe not getting addressed as often as maybe it should. But Dan is not really doing a lot of these things on his own. You know what I mean? Like there are other parties involved. And yes, I know I just do what I'm told, or, I don't know. I didn't know if it was wrong or if it was right, or if technically we were allowed to. No, there are parts of everybody's system where your integrity bell starts ringing and you make a choice, and you make the choice to either follow through with something that you know isn't right, or you make the choice to not follow through with something right. Because unless I'm mistaken in how revenue is collected, counted, and reported, Dan Snyder is not the only person with hands on these types of numbers.
No. Well, all right. So there's a couple of things at play here.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right that there's more than one person. Absolutely. It's an entire army, an entire staff. I'll tell you a quick story, which will lead me into my next point. I remember back in 2010, David, so this was Mike Shanahan's first year. After a disheartening loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I think it was 17-16 or something, that I think eliminated them from playoff contention that year. It was a miserable Sunday, like December 9th, December 10th. I was in the owner's lounge after the game with several executives, and one top former executive, Mitch Gershman, who, has been named in a lot of this stuff. Basically, he looked at me. They were having a conversation, he and a couple of other executives right in front of me. And they, the announced attendance was like 82,000 or something like that. And he looked at me and he said, he's like, the real number was, and I think he gave like a number of like 58,000 or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Which was more indicative of the crowd. And he looked at me and he said, don't you dare say a word. So I bring up that story to tell you, if they were cooking the numbers back in 2010, is it possible? And they've admitted to cooking the numbers all along, because Jason Wright has said several times this year, no. Our attendance this year is about us reporting it accurately, meaning in the past they hadn't before he got here. So is it possible that if they're reporting the numbers inaccurately or cooking the numbers for a previous period of time, that they were actually trying to hide money from the NFL? Is it possible? I ask you that. Is it possible? And to me, the answer is yes.
Yeah, anything is possible. Once it's nothing for a person. If a person thinks they can get away with literally infringing upon the physical being of another human being in some way, shape, or form, there's really nothing that stops them from trying to withhold entitlements to other people that honestly they have no way of knowing. Like the Dallas Cowboys have no way of knowing exactly what the Washington Commanders are going to report or what they've reported. They just have to kind of operate on faith. And then you got to have faith that when Washington visits Dallas, they're doing the same thing. And I'll be honest with you, I don't believe for a second that Dan Snyder or the Washington Commanders are the only owner, the only organization in the NFL to ever have done this, currently doing this, all of these things. What I do think this is just one more sign of the times that people are fed up with what Dan Snyder has done as the owner of the Washington Commanders, and that they're doing everything in their power within increments. Because again, and this is the kind of the communal atmosphere of NFL ownership, right? Every time an owner looks bad, the microscope also gets turned on to the other NFL franchises. So these people who may be leaking this information or anonymous sourcing this information, they're probably connected. And for the most part, I'm going to go on a limb and say that a lot of them probably are not just good-natured whistleblowers. A lot of them probably are involved in other organizations, but they also have to be careful, because the more attention you turn on to an NFL owner, the more attention you turn on to the NFL as a whole. And there are a lot of things that people in the NFL don't want people digging into.
Yep. Absolutely. A lot of skeletons in those closets. We will continue to monitor this situation. And like you said, we're scheduled to have AJ Perez, who broke this story over the weekend for Front Office Sports, on the next episode of Locked On Commanders. But coming up next, Colin Cowherd. Yes, Colin Cowherd ranked the NFC East quarterbacks. And you might be surprised where he ranked Carson Wentz. That's next on LOC. But David, our next partner has a product I think we both use literally every day. I know I started using it about a week and a half ago. It's called AG1. Why? Because I wanted better gut health, a little bit more energy. I wanted more vitamins. I wanted to do something good for my body. What is AG1? Well, it's one delicious scoop of Athletic Greens AG1, and you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food sourced superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. Special blend of ingredients, again, helps your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, all the good things that we're always trying to fix. Health facts, it's lifestyle friendly. Whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, gluten-free, it contains less than 1 gram of sugar, no GMOs, no nasty chemicals or artificial anything, and it costs you less than $3 a day. Think about all the pills and supplements that you're taking. You're investing in your health, and it's cheaper than, I don't know, your iced coffee that you might get at your local coffee shop. So get AG1. Plus, they've donated over 1.2 million meals to kids in 2020. So they're a great company invested in the community. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition, especially heading into the spring, allergies, cold, flu still out there. It's just one scoop in a cup of water every day. I take it every day. That's how I get my day started. That's what you want to try and do. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you got to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NFL Network. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/NFL Network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutrition insurance.
That's today's episode of the Locked On Commanders podcast, also brought to you by betonline.net, your number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, including this week's Masters Championships odds podcast and review for all different leagues this season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline, where the game starts.
All right, thanks again, Washington Commanders fans, for making us your first listen and your first watch if you're watching on YouTube, and we appreciate you whether you are listening or watching. Thanks for making us, again, your first listen watch of the day. Make sure you're following the Locked On NFL podcast. Locked On experts are covering the biggest stories around the NFL, and there's always something every Monday through Friday, less than 30 minutes, free and available wherever you get your podcast. Along with David Harrison, I'm Chris Russell. Make sure you follow the podcast at LO Commanders, David on Twitter at DHarrison82, and as well, SI.com's Fan Nation. I'm Chris Russell again at WrestleMania621. All right, so David, Colin Cowherd. I don't know what you think of Colin Cowherd. I used to like him a lot more than I probably do now. I have to admit he probably annoys me more than I enjoy him. But he's never been one to be shy about a controversial, if I could speak in English, polarizing opinion. And he came out with a ranking of the 4 NFC East quarterbacks. He called it the NFC East quarterback hierarchy. Number 4, shouldn't surprise anybody, Daniel Jones of the New York Giants. Number 3, Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles. Number 2, Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys, which means Carson Wentz is number 1. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, on first take, right, on the first intake of this ranking, you obviously pause because you're obviously going to assume that Dak Prescott is going to be number 1. Some might even assume that Jalen Hurts is going to be number 2, given the fact that the Philadelphia Eagles chose to move forward with Jalen Hurts and send Carson Wentz eventually to the Indianapolis Colts. I think Daniel Jones as number 4 is the easiest part of this whole rankings. I think there's 2 ways to look at this. Well, there's multiple ways to look at this, but there's 2 ways I really kind of look at this, and that is physical talent, right? Which quarterback is the most physically talented quarterback on the field, on the play? I call it the Madden standard. If this is Madden, which of these quarterbacks is the best, and then go from there, right? But when you take in a holistic look of these quarterbacks, then how do you rank them? And I'll be completely honest, I didn't see Cowherd's program the day that he ranked these quarterbacks, so I don't know the context that he used. But what I would say is this: if you're taking it holistically, like the entire body of work, the entire human being, look at their history, look at what you quote unquote expect, I would still put Carson Wentz number 2. I would have Dak Prescott number 1, but I don't think it's a clear-cut argument because really, what is the big thing? What is the biggest thing that Dak Prescott is going to have over Carson Wentz to push him at number 1? Is it arm talent? No, I don't think Dak Prescott's arm talent is really that much better than Carson Wentz's, if it is better. Is it overall athleticism? Again, when healthy, no, I don't believe so. I think Carson Wentz, Dak Prescott's not a Lamar Jackson type. He's mobile, but he's not Lamar Jackson, or Michael Vick reincarnated. He's a solid mobile quarterback for this day and age of football. So is Carson. I think a little bit less, but Carson is athletic as well. It's when you get down to the perceived leadership and selflessness and all those things that really puts Dak Prescott over the top. But again, when you're talking about a 2022 NFC East ranking, we don't know what Carson Wentz as a leader of the Washington Commanders is going to be. We don't know what Carson Wentz quarterback in Ron Rivera's organization with Scott Turner's offense coordinator is going to look like. We know what we've been told from Indy. We know what we've been told from Philly, but we also know what was told to us from Dak Prescott in Mississippi State, which is why he dropped to day 2 in the NFL draft, which turned out to be a lot of falsehoods that didn't need to be said about Dak Prescott, which is why he's one of the top NFL quarterbacks in today's game. So how heavily do you weigh the past when gauging the 2022 season and these stable of quarterbacks? Well, if you give Carson Wentz a clean slate, which I think everybody kind of deserves moving into a new organization, which I think Ron Rivera is going to give him as a new quarterback, then you base this on just pure talent. If you were to argue Dak Prescott's more talented than Carson Wentz, I'm not going to die on that hill against you. But I think there's an argument to be made there. And the thing with Jalen Hurts, he's number 1 in upside. If you want to have the conversation about which NFC East has the highest upside, I think we've seen the least out of Jalen Hurts, and potentially he could go to even higher heights than any of the quarterbacks left in the NFC East. But if you're talking about 2022 alone, physical attributes, I think there's an argument to be made that Carson Wentz is the most talented quarterback in the NFC East.
Well, so it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think, again, if Cowherd, and you're right, we're lacking the context. If he's just purely talking about talent, there's no doubt who is the most talented. And you just said it's Carson Wentz, but we all know the quarterback position is so much more than that. I will say this. I have a slight bone to pick on Jalen Hurts. Listen, I like the pick of Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts, to me, while he's slightly gotten better as a passer, to me, as athletic as he is, as much of a run threat as he is, he's still got a long way to go, even before bad Carson Wentz and bad Dak Prescott. So to me, I don't think it's going to happen in 2022 that he's going to be able to leapfrog either one of those. Right. So then the real question again, and Daniel Jones, we know, has talent, but he turns the ball over too much and he's always hurt. So really then the question becomes is what Carson Wentz is the NFC East getting? As you said, is it 2017 Carson Wentz, which Ron Rivera has gone about concept? Okay. Well, if it's that, then Carson Wentz is clearly number 1. But if it's not, then and again, I don't do any ranking just based off of one component. I don't know anybody that should, right? No. Like, meaning if Cowherd is just looking at pure talent, well, why aren't you looking at pure talent and the last 3 years and the talent around him? Now, if you're making the argument it was pure talent and the fact that Dak had more weapons than Carson in Philadelphia and Indianapolis, well, then that's a fair argument, right? And then I can see how you would put Carson Wentz number 1. I disagree with that. Sounds like you disagree with that, but I could see that being the rationale. But you have to have that rationale as this is why he's number 1. And until I know that, and until I have that, I look at it and I say, I think it's more about you wanting to avoid the obvious, what everybody else would rank, meaning Dak Prescott number 1 and then everyone else next, and you wanting to stand out. Why? Because you're Colin Cowherd and you want to make some headlines, and because you want to be different, which is fine. But give us the context that you're ranking this, because you can't possibly be ranking this based on recent performance.
Yeah, you want to avoid the elephant in the room, be different for the sake of being different, however you want to say it, you know what I mean? So the context is really what matters here. But I mean, again, at the end of the day, when you add in the whole scene, look, the Washington Commanders also have supposedly, and again, these things will play out and change as we go. But as of right now, based off of last year's win-loss totals, Washington Commanders have the easiest schedule in the NFL this year. So does that elevate? Like Carson Wentz's numbers might elevate because he's playing, quote unquote, inferior competition. Okay, that's true. That's the context of the conversation, but his numbers still might be elevated, which means his production might be better than a guy like Dak Prescott. So there's a lot of reasons every rankings list is subjective, which is why we always disagree with them, which is why we all, some people agree, some people disagree. It's like mock drafts. Mock drafts are in the eye of the beholder, which is why when you do them, and I'm sure Colin is well aware of this, you do them understanding that you're going to get some applause, you're going to get some boos, and then you're going to have a larger chunk, about 80% of the population in the middle. That's like, yeah, I can see that. And that's pretty much what I think what this list is.
Absolutely. It's polarizing, no doubt about it. And coming up, you just mentioned how a mock draft can be polarizing or interesting or controversial. Why don't we get to our colleague Joe Marino's next? And you'll see what we mean by controversy and polarizing. We'll share it with you. But first, David and I want to tell you guys about Built Bar, and specifically Built Bar Puffs. Have you tried the Puffs yet? We keep telling you about them. If you're missing out, you're missing out on something really good. They are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, marshmallowy, of course, and they're delicious. They are a treat to behold. 100% covered in chocolate, some great flavors, yummy, cinnamony churro, coconut marshmallow, and my favorite, the banana cream pie. Oh, so good. And of course, the regular Built Bars, as you know, are delicious, and all the multiple flavors, and they're always coming out with limited time flavors. They're healthy for you, covered in 100% real chocolate, soft, easy to chew, low in calories, high in protein. Oh, you're not going to be disappointed by any Built Bar product. Again, whatever your flavor is, David's favorite is mint brownie. Mine is anything with peanut butter, but I love them all. Get it now at BuiltBar.com. And when you go to BuiltBar.com, use the promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com.
Segment 3 here at the Locked On Washington Commanders podcast. David Harrison and Chris Russell kicking off the week with you here, also on Twitter at WrestleMania621, at DHarrison82, and at LO Commanders. It's Monday, and it's Mock Draft Monday. Of course, the NFL Draft, Chris, is just weeks away. The offseason is flying by and will continue to do so until about June, and then it's going to crawl or slow to a painful crawl for the most part. Maybe not with the Washington Commanders. We'll see. Yeah, might be the most exciting part of the offseason, to be quite honest with you. But this Monday,
stop. There's no break ever. You're sentenced to doom.
Yeah, it seems like that, doesn't it? So this Monday, Mock Draft Monday, we're looking at Joe Marino, our guy over the Locked On Bills podcast, also the Draft Dudes podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and of course, one of the founding members of the Draft Network. He's dropped his latest mock draft, Chris, and we've got a very interesting top 10 for one very big reason. I mean, some of it we've got, four trench players, 3 edge rushers, and offensive tackle in the first 4 picks. That makes sense. Another edge rusher and 2 more offensive tackles to round out the top 10. So, I mean, really, if you look at it, the trenches are getting a lot of attention, but there are 3 spots in this top 10 that really stood out to you, Chris.
Yeah, and 3 spots not going to wide receiver, not going to corner, not going to safety. But
Sauce Gardner not in the top 10 for the first time, I think, ever in mock drafts this year.
Yeah, 3 quarterbacks in the top 10. I guess before we get to Washington's pick, which we've already had several mock drafts picking this player, so we don't have to spend, per se, a ton of time on it because I think we both agree that it's a solid pick. But let me ask you this. 3 quarterbacks in the top 10 of a draft that everybody, like you said, has just kicked the quarterbacks to the curb. If that's ultimately what happens, he's got Malik Willis from Liberty going number 2 to the Lions, which that has certainly picked up steam. Number 6, Carolina. Clearly they need a quarterback. Pittsburgh's Kenny Pickett. And then the surprise for me, although I know he's climbing because of his athleticism and experience and all that size, Desmond Ridder, quarterback from Cincinnati, going to the Falcons. If 3 quarterbacks go in the top 10, David, your immediate reaction on night 1 of the draft is what?
it's typical in the NFL overvaluation of the quarterback position.
Yeah.
We've seen this over and over again. Look, I said it when Jared Goff was drafted by the Rams. I said it when Carson Wentz was drafted by the Eagles, and they traded so much of their future to do so. Now, obviously, for the Rams, years later, it worked out in the end. So all's well that ends well. But then you look at the Philadelphia Eagles and the situation they're in. That's kind of the counterpoint and point of the argument, right? And then you look at the Cleveland Browns, Baker Mayfield, when that whole thing went down. I mean, a lot of these situations are somewhat predictable, but they still continue to happen. I think that's what this mock is indicative of. You look at a team like the Detroit Lions and Malik Willis. If you're going to go quarterback at number 2 and you're the Detroit Lions, Malik Willis is the guy to take. Why? Because you're planning on pushing Jared Goff back out there for 2022. You're probably looking at another top 5 or top 10 draft pick in 2023 and all those things. So you're planning on letting Malik grow. And Malik Willis, with a year in an NFL system, is better than Stroud or anybody else coming out in next year's draft. I will agree with that. It pretty much sends a sign to the rest of your team that 2022 is a bridge year, right? Take that for what it's worth. So I don't hate that pick for the Detroit Lions. I don't necessarily agree with it wholeheartedly either. Kenny Pickett at number 6 to the Carolina Panthers is all about the fact that Matt Rule knows he's got zero time to get a winning product on the field. And right now he has no quarterbacks on his roster that are going to give him a winning product. Kenny Pickett is the closest to NFL ready in this draft class. So that's the last Hail Mary one home run shot you have at potentially putting this thing together enough. And we saw Matt Nagy and Chicago Bears and Ryan Pace do this last year with Justin Fields. Draft a rookie quarterback, hope that you see enough signs of life that ownership decides to give you another year to try to put this thing together, just extend and I hate when coaches and general managers get into this position because you're now making decisions not based off of what's best for your team, but based off of what's best for you. But that's the situation you put people in. And when you put people's careers on the line, I can't say I wouldn't do the same thing. So I'm not judging. I'm just saying I hate to see it because the Panthers are not a quarterback away or not ready to install a young quarterback in that offense. The Falcons, Desmond Ridder, number 8. I hate the pick at number 8. I love Desmond Ridder in Atlanta. I just wish it would happen in the beginning of the second round. The only way that's going to happen is the quarterbacks don't come off the board. So if you're the Atlanta Falcons and you love Desmond Ridder and you see 2 quarterbacks come off in the first 6 picks, do you feel confident that you can get Desmond Ridder at the top of the second round? I don't. So maybe I trade back for a team that assures me they're taking a wide receiver, assures me they're taking an offensive tackle or another position, and hope that I read the Seahawks and everything else correctly, and that I can still get Desmond Ridder at pick 12 or 13 or whatever it is. But I can't, with the way the board fell, I couldn't blame the Falcons if they pull the trigger on Ridder at number 8 because of the overvaluation on quarterbacks. But again, I hope they do so with the intention of rolling Marcus Mariota out in 2022, coming back in 2023 and restocking the shelves a little bit more for Ridder to be your starting quarterback in year 2.
All right. Good breakdown there on the 3 quarterbacks. I agree in large part. Real quickly, the Commanders at number 11, if they stay there, Joe has them picking Kyle Hamilton, the safety, the do-everything safety from Notre Dame. We're going to have this debate at another time. Do you take the all-everything safety or do you take the top corner in the draft in Ahmed Sauce Gardner or one of the top flight wide receivers, whichever one you like best? I mean, it's an either or, and I could say that's why I think they'll ultimately trade down, but Joe has them going with Kyle Hamilton from Notre Dame. Again, more on that as we go through the week and as we get closer to the draft. All right. Thanks for making us the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listen and watch of the day. Now make your second listen and watch the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Ryan Tracy, former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker, as they bring the NFL draft to life each and every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and the NFL in terms of front offices. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. Again, I'll be back with a solo episode, actually the next 2. I've got a couple of guests lined up. We're scheduled to be joined by AJ Perez, first up of Front Office Sports, who broke that big report on Dan Snyder and the hidden ticket revenue alleged. We will have that on the next episode. If you want to jump in, it's Locked On Washington Commanders at gmail.com or the voicemail line 301-615-3577, 888-848-3577. For David Harrison, who's covering the Washington Commanders and much, much more for SI.com's Fan Nation, I'm Chris Russell, co-host of the Russell and Medhurst Show. Just a little radio show you can hear 3 to 7 Monday through Friday on the Team 980 and the Audacy app. If you're out and about, please be safe, kind to each other. Don't drive like a maniac. And thank you for joining us right here on the Locked On Commanders podcast.